And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this Saturday early evening drive with me here in New York. I'm going to be very, very careful, I promise. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So we're going to stay on the same theme of Halloween horror, but also what would now have to be considered old school classics. To me, regardless of era, regardless of what year you are currently in, any movie that is more than 25 years old is an old school classic. I think that's fair to say, and that is just my opinion. For some people, maybe old school classic means it's got to go back to the 70s, but for me, old school classic, 25 years or older. Now, so far, we've talked about The Blair Witch Project, a movie which is now incredibly more than 25 years old. And we've talked about Robin Hardy's OG, The Wicker Man from 1973, and Tobe Hooper's quite extraordinary to this day, 1974 original, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so, sticking with the same theme, almost literally, I'm going to talk about a movie that has meaning to me and I feel a personal connection to, but not for the reason that you would necessarily think. This is not a personal film for me as far as, oh my God, it's my favorite horror film. No. But there are those moments in life where you form memories with others, and maybe they're no longer in your life. Today's movie is William Friedkin's trailblazing, groundbreaking 1973 classic, The Exorcist. Now, I don't necessarily consider The Exorcist to be a scary film in the conventional sense. It has the moments where it might raise a little bit of goose flesh, but I see the film as very serious, and it takes itself very seriously, and that is also an important distinction. Because there have been movies in the ballpark of Possession that are just flat out gory horror movies with a lot of special effects and sometimes shit blowing up real good. If you have never seen The Exorcist, or if you haven't seen it in a couple of decades, as was the case with me the most recent time I saw it, The Exorcist is a body horror film. It is a medical thriller film. And if all you do is read the description, and if you see a trailer with a lot of frightening images, you would be, or could be, tricked into thinking this is a straightforward horror film, just very classy and exceedingly well done. It's not really true. This movie doesn't necessarily follow the tenets of a horror film. It does and it doesn't, because there is the supernatural component. And there is the idea of these are natural occurring events within Regan McNeil's psychological profile that is causing this. You know, we think the temporal lobe. There's always the last resort and the kind of holdouts who continue to believe that something of naturally occurring origin is taking place. But in the world of this film, it's not. It is something other, even if it is not a monster in the conventional sense. This is not Daniel Robitaille / Candyman either killing people or not killing people, or maybe he's just bewitching and enchanting people into committing the murders for him. We don't really know. The Exorcist, though, was the first full-blown horror film that was the kind of movie that would be nominated and potentially win Oscars. Not just be a big box office hit, not just be a kind of touchstone movie where everybody, whether they see it or not, everyone's talking about it and people are having these horrified reactions seeing it in theaters, whatever the case might be. Now, I had seen The Exorcist, I believe, 3 separate times, start to finish, at various points in my life. As I say, this is a movie I'm a fan of, but it's not a movie that I would normally just sit down to watch. This is a very difficult film. This is not a fun horror film a la The Lost Boys from the 80s, or The Monster Squad, or a film of that ilk. This is a very sobering, at times painful, and not painfully scary, but painful to see Linda Blair as Regan McNeil go through this horrible ordeal. And Ellen Burstyn was so amazing as the mom, Chris McNeil. And I should also point out Max von Sydow as the title character of The Exorcist, Father Merrin. There are movies where the makeup department does such an incredible job that you can't believe that the actors are the age they are if you don't know. Orson Welles, the makeup done on Orson Welles for Citizen Kane in some of the later sequences when he's at his palatial estate called Xanadu. It's fucking unbelievable. The work on Max von Sydow in this film, you compare what he looks like in this movie to how the actor looked like 30 years later, it is mind-blowing how good a job they did. The other movie that I always think of is not in the class of either of those two, but with superlative makeup work, Mr. Holland's Opus, a film I have discussed on the channel. I'm a big fan. The work on Richard Dreyfuss. If you did not know that Richard Dreyfuss was 50, early 50s, however old he actually was, he looks like he's 30. That's how good the makeup work and how subtle it is. So the makeup work in The Exorcist, the work on Father Merrin, and the work on Pazuzu the demon, everything is great. And even the very interesting way the movie deals with how Ellen Burstyn's Chris McNeil begins to show the wear and the strain of the ordeal that she's going through as the mother. Very, very impressive work all around. It's not really necessarily the things that you're going to think about if you're going into what you believe is a conventional horror film, which, again, this is not that. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is way more of a conventional horror film. That was the first modern horror film, and that's 13 years before The Exorcist. What I wanted to say, though, about the movie in particular is that I saw it last year with my dearly departed friend Kenny and another friend who I have not seen in quite some time. And Kenny passed not long after we saw this movie. And unfortunately, I will always equate, I don't want to say equate the two, but the two events were so closely connected in terms of time. We had such a great night seeing the movie, even though the three of us had, of course we had all seen the film, but we went for the podcast, and it was Kenny's podcast. He was the person who made me his co-host on his podcast, the KPC and JPC podcast. And he's the one who gave me the belief that I could do this, or something like it, that I could be a podcaster. I didn't only have to be a guest, that I had the kind of wherewithal and the knowledge and the ability to speak off the cuff that you have to have, because most podcasters don't work with a script. I mean, sometimes you will. You have an idea of what you want to talk about, but it's not like a stage play or anything of that sort. So we went with the podcast and we interviewed a number of people who were in attendance. And it was a regular screening at a regular movie theater for the 50th anniversary. Again, the 50 anniversaries, The Wicker Man, last year, the 50th anniversary of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's actually going to be in theaters coming up next week to celebrate the 50th anniversary. We went to the 50th anniversary screening of The Exorcist, and we talked to a ton of people in attendance. I think it was in Westbury at one of the stadium seating off of Brush Hollow Road, for those who are familiar with the area. We also saw Back to the Future. We saw Back to the Future at that theater off Brush Hollow Road. The Exorcist we saw in Farmingdale, near the bottom of where Route 110 would meet Sunrise Highway in Farmingdale. Farmingdale's about to turn to Piqua over there. But there were actually people in attendance for the 50th anniversary screening who had never seen the movie. And I don't know, I see somebody who I think is in my age bracket. It was a woman who I believe may have been slightly older than me, and she was there with her husband. I thought that was really cool. that she was, because both her husband and her son said they had seen the film at least 10 times apiece. She just had refused, but for this night, because of the 50th anniversary, it was so much fun. We had such a great time. And the movie was even more brutal from the medical perspective than I remembered. I remember vaguely, because I don't think I had seen the film since the early 2000s. I'd gotten the DVD, which had a couple of deleted scenes, the infamous spider walk and all of that. But the film had stretches of pain and the suffering of Regan McNeil. I don't know, maybe I blocked it out, because I certainly remember Jason Miller and with the mom, and the great Lee J. Cobb as Detective Kinderman and his shtick, and asking people if they want to go to the movies with him. And man, Lee J. Cobb, what a fucking boss. What a boss that guy was. A great actor. I mean, my favorite performance of his is 12 Angry Men, because how could it not be? But he was somebody who had such a distinctive and interesting face for the movies, and he always brought he brings this movie back to reality, because there's so much fantastical stuff going on, mostly negative. And he is this grounded character, and Lee J. Cobb always came across with that sense of, to use Richard Donner's favorite word, verisimilitude. He feels like a real detective. He doesn't feel like an actor trying to hit his marks and deliver lines a certain way. He feels like this is how this guy would behave. There might be fantastical stuff, but let's keep the investigation at the kind of street level, and let's just go from there. So the experience of seeing the film that night, we all had a great time. And then it wasn't long after that Kenny passed. And the kind of real horror of life, the things that happen that can take us by surprise. It's, from a certain point of view, what Boris Karloff's character of Byron Orlock says in another movie that I'm probably going to talk about again on the channel, Targets, where in that movie, Boris plays Byron Orlock, who is a horror film legend. He's basically playing himself, just with a different name. And he's retiring. As Boris Karloff was just about 80, was contemplating retirement. He had enough. He didn't need the money anymore, but unless it was a project like Targets where he really loved the script, and Peter Bogdanovich, who was on his way to a big career. But Byron Orlock, in the world of that movie, does not feel as if his movies are worthy, because they can't compete, unfortunately, with the horrors of real life. And there is nothing that you can do to prepare yourself for the unexpected horror of losing a close friend, losing a loved one. That's real horror. That's not getting a kick out of something that makes you scared. That is the kind of thing that, unfortunately, you carry with you for the rest of your days. And I will always conflate the two, the movie and Kenny, and how much of a great time we had, even though the movie itself is not exactly a great time in cinemas. But just as far as the film itself, it holds up. The special effects still work, and there is a lot of mechanical effects, and famously, William Friedkin didn't really give a shit that he was, and he knew there was a potential that he was going to probably maim and injure Ellen Burstyn, that famous, that hydraulic, well, it's not really supposed to be a hydraulic, it's supposed to be the demon, sending her through the air and crashing down. But that sequence is so jarring, whether or not you know what Friedkin did, which was completely, disgusting. I know that Friedkin was a great filmmaker, but Ellen Burstyn was a trooper, to say the least, that she didn't just leave the production and sue everybody. Well, she was going to stay the course. The movie, though, still holds up, as does Texas Chainsaw, as does the OG Wicker Man. And if you ask me, as does the Blair Witch Project. But The Exorcist, unlike those films, it doesn't develop in any way like a horror movie. You have a story of a single mom, and her daughter. And it is not a story that necessarily has to be horror. But horrifying, unexplainable things happen, and it takes a turn into a genre. In this case, the horror genre. And everything in the film feels plausible because there is no real explanation. This cannot be occurring. She doesn't have cancer. She does not have a tumor. She was not in any kind of a terrible accident that would cause some sort of bizarre temporal lobe issue that would cause or make her seem to be possessed. Like, it's all gobbledygook. And also, the film shows us. And this is not one of those where you're not sure if the characters are loco or are they really experiencing this. We know what we see. We are not so much ahead of the characters. We're ahead of the characters that keep trying to explain away shit that is not explainable. And the film is so gripping. And Linda Blair didn't have the career that she could have, but what a wonderful child actress she was. She shows and gives us an insight into the joy of Reagan before things go wrong, and the close relationship she has with her mother. And Chris McNeil, of course, is presented as a very successful film actress. She's not supposed to be that far from what Ellen Burstyn in real life, presumably what her life was like. You know, she has money, but she's still working, and she's close with her kid, her family, and she has friends and all of that. But it's a movie that it hits you different as you get older, and maybe you lose people. And the idea of losing a loved one to something that can't be explained, to something as terrifying as an actual real-world demon. I mean, it's fucking crazy stuff. And I remember seeing the film for the first time. I rented it. I was not old enough to see this movie. I think the first time I saw The Exorcist, I was 12. And all of that medical stuff and all of the body horror stuff, I mean, it didn't hit me the same way. I thought the film was scary. It worked as a conventional horror film. But it didn't get to me the same way because I was too young to appreciate. And as somebody who really, at that point, hadn't lost anybody, just the idea, I just assumed that Reagan was going to be fine, and it wasn't landing for me that Chris McNeil was so devastated. Well, what's the big deal? She's going to be okay. Well, they have to go to hell and back, almost literally, for her to be okay, for there to be a possibility of her being okay. And there are certain, and I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, but there are certain avenues it appears this movie is going to go down where it doesn't. And I feel like it's to the movie's benefit. And the thing is, with William Friedkin and the original author, William Peter Blatty, they didn't always get along. The guys respected each other, but there are plenty of interviews where they're disagreeing on a lot of stuff. And I feel like Friedkin's opinion is that his movie is actually better than Blatty's book, and Blatty's feeling is, I love Billy, but he's fucking crazy, you know, that kind of thing. So everybody thought that William Friedkin was nuts. But nuts, crazy like a fox, not in a conventional sense, but that he was willing to do anything and did not want to compromise whatever his vision is. Hence the story with him using this ridiculous hydraulic to nearly kill Ellen Burstyn because it was a shot that wasn't working well enough for him. You gotta send her back with everything you got. Just fucking hit her as hard as you can, so to speak. Film, though, continues to weave its terrible magic all of these years later. And you can't really explain it to newbies. And also, because we are in an era where attention spans tend to be shorter, ironically, you still have very long movies made by masters such as Coppola and Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon. But in general, we're in a shorter attention span society. We are in a social media society. We are in a TikTok, YouTube Shorts thought process for many people, and not just people under 25. I just mean in general. Where I'm going with this is I don't believe the opening sequence with Father Merrin in the Middle East, I don't believe that would survive to a final cut today. I think that would be shot and it would be either scrapped entirely or maybe we would get fragments in flashback, but I'm very confident in saying That scene as is not opening the movie. They're marketed as a horror film. They're going to start with something scary, and not that. It'll be something other than that. Now, The Exorcist is a movie that it was an enormous box office hit. And again, it was a huge cultural event. It was not just a movie. The Godfather the previous year was a huge cultural event. Steven Spielberg's Jaws in 1975, you could argue, was an even bigger cultural event. That was technically the first what you would call big summer blockbuster that got a wide release where they didn't stagger it or do anything like that. But The Exorcist, I believe, was nominated for 8 Oscars, and I know that it won a few. It might have won for the music, for that kind of crazy Tubular Bells, I think is the name of the tune. And I know Ellen Burstyn was nominated for Best Actress. If you ask me the question, what movie in the horror arena should have won its actress and Oscar for Best Actress, I'm not going to say Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist. I'm going to say Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, who is so extraordinary in that movie as Ellen Ripley. I don't have anything against Marlee Matlin. She's really wonderful in Children of a Lesser God, opposite her co-star who had just won an Oscar for Best Actor the previous year, William Hurt. But I think that should have been Sigourney's Oscar. I honestly, if I'm being straightforward and transparent, I don't know the other 1973 Best Actress nominees aside from Ellen Burstyn, so I don't know if, she got robbed. I'll leave that to you because I'm sure some of you who are going to watch this episode are going to know more about that particular year's Oscars than myself. But she's great, and Lee J. Cobb is great, and Jason Miller is so good as Father Karras. He's so good in his scenes with his mother. Just amazing. Those also are moments that might be tilted now. They might not come across the same way. And we saw the recent Exorcist film, which did okay at the box office. Ellen Burstyn was in it, but it got trashed. Now, I've never actually seen Exorcist II: The Heretic, where Linda Blair came back. The reviews on that one are so horrendous that I never bothered to watch it. And a big filmmaker, too. I think it was John Boorman, who had recently done Deliverance before that. However, though, on a positive note, Exorcist 3, which came out in 1990, very, very good. George C. Scott plays, I think, you can quote me on this, I'm pretty sure I'm right, I think he plays the character that Lee J. Cobb played in the original. He's just supposed to be a little bit older. But Exorcist 3 is very good. It is absolutely worth it. So if you're asking me what should you do, you should watch the first one. Don't waste your time with Exorcist II: The Heretic. It's everybody tells me it's lousy. It's not even worth wasting 2 hours. It's just not good. Go straight from Exorcist 1 to Exorcist 3, and I'm not going to spoil it, but Jason Miller is in the movie. The guy that played Father Karras, as I just said. That would be your best bet to watch The Exorcist and then go to Exorcist 3. Now, as far as streaming, I know The Exorcist has been on Netflix. I know it's been on Shudder. It's been on Tubi. You'll probably be able to find it for free somewhere on YouTube if it hasn't been taken down. But it is a great movie. And I know The Exorcist 3 was streaming free on Amazon Prime for about a year. I don't know if it still is. But OG Exorcist, all the acclaim, huge box office, and a very influential film. How many movies have we seen about possession? I even mentioned The Taking of Deborah Logan, which was a found footage film in the Blair Witch arena, deals with possession. And The Exorcist is the original and still the best of that kind of film, which has elements of body horror, elements of spiritual torment and spiritual horror. But it is just a great film, regardless of genre. It is not just a great horror film. It is a great motion picture made with care, and dare I say, made with love by everyone in the cast, including Friedkin. Because as much as Friedkin, we could joke around and people could say the guy, he was so far out there, he did just want to make the best movie possible. You can take issue with his methods, but not the root of where it came from. We're going to make the best possible movie from Blatty's work, and warts and all, he succeeds magnificently. It is a movie that you can revisit every couple of years and will still be in its grasp. almost as if you're possessed. You know, you can't look away. It is that kind of movie. You don't want to go to the bathroom. You don't want to hit pause. It just draws you in, and you're with it the whole way. There's no breaks, no nothing. And you really don't know how it's all going to turn out. And that's really the best of cinema, that you've already seen a movie, but it's so good, it's so engaging and so gripping that you can revisit it anytime, and it's going to just draw you in from the first frame until the last. The Exorcist, based on the novel by William Peter Blatty, directed by William Friedkin, and starring Ellen Burstyn, Linda Blair, Lee J. Cobb, and the late, great Jason Miller. This has been episode 326 of the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday early evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others on which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.